Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode. We're going to be talking about The Nature of Love by Toni Shiloh. So, this little beauty is a contemporary Christian romance, so it fits within the Christian fiction genre, and it has really good, solid faith threads in it, which I'll be talking about a bit further in the episode. So, The Nature of Love is book three in Toni Shiloh's Love in the Spotlight series. The first book is The Love Script, which is set in Hollywood. The second book in the series is A Run at Love, which is set around the Kentucky Derby. I've read both of those books and really enjoyed them, and I have recommendations on my author blog, and there'll be a link in the show notes to that. So I read an advanced reader copy, it's called an ARC of The Nature of Love, and thank you to the publisher for giving me a complimentary copy. And all the opinions that I'm expressing in this video are all my own, just add that little disclaimer. So let's talk about the book. The Nature of Love by Toni Shiloh is set in Colorado, around the Colorado Springs area. And the romance tropes that you'll find in this book is friends to more, which is one of my favorites. I always like that trope. And the healing power of love is a very big theme in the book. And the main characters really are from different worlds, and particularly their careers are very different to each other. So the first line is quite intriguing in this book, and I'm just going to read it to you. It's drilling a hole in the middle of a person's femur was my least favorite thing to do. And my first reaction is, ouch. I can't imagine drilling a hole into someone's femur. So, as you probably guess, we have a character who is a surgeon, and Erica, who's our leading lady in the book, is an orthopedic surgeon. She's 41 years old and she lives in Colorado Springs and works at the hospital there. And she is a very shy person. So she's incredibly accomplished. She's a well-renowned leading surgeon in her field. But she finds it really difficult to make friends and to make small talk. And she feels very awkward in social situations. When she was going through medical school and all that kind of thing, she was really busy because she also raised her younger sister. She comes from a very complex family of origin, and her parents just really weren't there for her or her sister. And so she's obviously very independent and very capable. And she's single because she's married to her job, and she just hasn't had time really to even think about relationships between raising a sister and then having a very all-encompassing career. And then we have our hero, and his name is Chris. And he is the one in the spotlight, which is the name of the series is Love in the Spotlight. So he's the one in the spotlight. He's a wildlife conservationist in Colorado, and he's also a YouTube star. So he makes his money off YouTube videos and the revenue he gets from that when he uploads them. So he lives his talk, and he has an eco-friendly cabin that he lives in. So that was quite interesting to see as well. And he's also feeling his singleness. So he's 42, and his two best friends, who we meet in the earlier books in the series, are both getting married. So he's now listening to them, and they have these lovely group chats, and they're talking about making plans for weddings. And he's kind of feeling like the fifth wheel in this friendship group that he's in. And years ago, he was jilted at the altar, so he's a little bit gun shy about relationships, but now he's thinking, oh, maybe I should have thought about that. So he's also a really loyal friend. He lives his faith, and he's also got a new opportunity to do a docu-series, and they apparently were looking at the grey wolf being reintroduced back into the wild in Colorado. So he's got this new opportunity, as well as doing his YouTube, to do a docu-series as well, which is pretty cool. So Erica and Chris have this adorable meet cute in a very ordinary place. They're basically getting burgers for dinner at this restaurant in Colorado Springs, and it was quite adorable the way they awkwardly met each other. And this isn't a spoiler, but what we end up finding out quite early in the book is that due to a tragedy, Erica ends up with custody of her nieces. So she has a 5-year-old niece, Cheyenne, who is just adorable, because 5 is such an adorable age. And then there's Ashlyn, who's a baby, who's only, I think, 5, maybe 5, 6 months old, not very old at all. And basically, out of nowhere, Erica is put in a situation where she has custody of her two little nieces, and she's never really thought that motherhood would be something that she would do. I mean, she's in her 40s now. She thought that looking after children was something that wasn't going to happen for her. So this is all quite a big shock and really bittersweet because she adores her nieces and nephews and she was a very doting aunt. But at the same time, she really misses their parents who are no longer with us. So that really, the stress of losing her sister is really what pushed her to consider God and faith. She'd never really thought about that. And one of the things I loved about this book is the really strong salvation thread that runs through the story. Now, once upon a time, when I first started reading Christian fiction, it was almost obligatory to have a salvation scene in the story. So if you had a romance, you'd have one heroine, you'd have the hero or heroine, one would be a Christian, one would be an almost Christian thinking about being a Christian, and then part of the story would be the non-Christian coming to faith and becoming a Christian and then living happily ever after, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes that worked and sometimes it was a bit preachy and a bit too much. It depended on the story, but it's not something we see often. And so Toni has put a really solid, biblically grounded foundation faith thread in this story, and it's beautiful. And I really loved it. So if you're looking for a book that has a solid faith thread that looks at the journey of coming to faith, then this is a really good one to look at. So what else did I love about this book? It really met my expectations for a Toni Shiloh book. I'm a big fan of her books. I've been reading them for quite a few years now, and she usually delivers a really solid faith thread in her story. So I really appreciate that. Her characters are relatable and they're not perfect. They have problems and issues to overcome, and I love the way she sensitively handles issues in the stories that she writes. The children are just adorable. I mean, you've got a baby and a 5-year-old, so you can't go wrong with that. And this was an emotional read. I did shed a few tears in a few parts of the stories, particularly, I mean, when you're dealing with grief, it's always going to be difficult to read. And I've always been a crier. I mean, I can cry quite easily. I'm an easy crier when it comes to watching movies and different things. It doesn't take much for me to cry. So I did shed a few tears in this one. You may not if you are less susceptible to crying than I am, but it wasn't heavy. So even though it had some really big issues that it was dealing with in the story, with grief and loss and family relationships, it didn't actually bog the story down. There were a lot of fun and lighthearted moments as well that balanced everything out. And it was really interesting because I like romances where the whole concept of marrying someone to complete you is not on the table, because I don't think that is a very healthy way to look at relationships. So Erica could have quite happily, and Chris as well, they could have quite happily lived their lives single. And I really loved how Toni brought them together and how this friendship that formed between them. And Chris was quite instrumental in talking to her about faith matters as well in a really lovely, gentle way. And I just loved how that all came together as well. So my favorite book quote from the story is, "God saw me. He was with me. He had been watching over me my whole life." And I really loved how we got to see the journey that Erica went on her faith journey in the story. And in terms of trigger warnings, if you're struggling with grief and loss and that's something that you're sensitive to at the moment, this might not be the book to read right now, but definitely a book to read down the track. In terms of whether you could read it as a standalone, it's part of a series, but this one could definitely be read as a standalone if you wanted to jump into the series at book 3. There are the 3 guys who we meet in the first book. So in Love in the Spotlight, we meet them in this 3-way text messaging series that gradually grows to having 5 people and they're involved by the time we get to book 3. And so I really like seeing the relationship between the guys in the series. So if you jump in at book 3, you would miss some of that, but you could definitely read this as a standalone without any issues. So in summary, I would recommend this book to readers who like contemporary Christian romance romance that has depth. This isn't a light and fluffy story, although it does have some lovely, fun moments in it. If you like a book that has strong family relationships and really values the importance of family and looking after your loved ones, then you'll love this book. I really loved how the characters made healthy sacrifices for the people they cared about. And they weren't doormats or people pleasers. They were very independent in their own right. And when they did something that was sacrificial, it was done for the right reasons. And I really appreciated that. And this one is a great one if you're a Friends to More romance fan and you like to see a strong friendship develop into a loving relationship, then this is a great one for you. And it also explores the daily challenges of having young children. And that was quite amusing in times and quite poignant and at other times as well. And the salvation faith thread in the story is a winner for me. Thank you for joining me today. Does The Nature of Love, Toni Shiloh's book, sound like a book that you'd like to read? Have you already read The Nature of Love? What do you think of the book? You can let me know if you're listening on the podcast. You can actually send a text message via a link in the show notes. If you're listening on YouTube, you can like the episode and leave a comment at YouTube. I can also be contacted via email at my website at narelleatkins.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend who likes reading contemporary Christian romance. Thanks again for tuning in and see you next time.